Welcome to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast. Well, many thanks for joining us on the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast today. We are pleased to be media partner for the Workspace Design Show, which is going to be held at London's Business Design Centre on the 26th and 27th of February 2025. Registration is free. It's open now, so make sure you do sign up because it'd be lovely to see you there. We're going to be there too. There's 135 inspirational speakers across 4 conferences, and today we're joined by 2 of those speakers in our podcast today. We're joined first by Collin Burry. He's design director and principal at Gensler. He was an inductee into Interior Design Magazine's Hall of Fame. He's a soft modernist, in inverted commas, at heart. He describes himself as both a left and right brain designer who also creates environments that strive for beauty and are grounded in strategy. Collin has transformed the interiors of many of the world's most innovative brands like Apple, Dolby, Samsung, and he's earned more than 60 design awards, which is pretty impressive. He also believes in designing spaces that are responsible for our planet and enrich the lives of the people who use them. So, Collin, many thanks for joining us today.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Collin Burry. I am a design principal and design director here at Gensler in London. I've been at Gensler for 27 years, which is crazy, almost 27 and a half years now. Originally, I started in San Francisco, where I was for 25 years after moving here 5 years ago. So the amazing thing about living in the Bay Area was it really was a front row seat to all the innovation and advancements in technology that we're now living with all of these things, right, that we all live with, love them or hate them. And it was just an incredibly exciting period to be there and sort of see the power of innovation and optimism and opportunity and sort of what that can create for the world. And a big part of that, I think California is very much a state, if you separate it up from the rest of the US. And actually, there's a lot of states in the US that I think are really, really focused on DE&I, sustainability, wellness and being or whatever in the workplace, and are doing some really interesting things around that world as well.
Yeah, exactly. What got you into design in the first place? I mean, fine art and all that sort of thing. But what was the germ that?
Yeah. So it was the one time in my life I listened to my mother. She encouraged me to study design because I think she saw that I was a very creative kid. I was a competitive figure skater from age of 5 to 15, which as part of that, I had to be into, learn about classical music because most of the, performances and things you did then were mostly done to classical music. So I learned about music, and she was also a musician. She played the piano, so I learned about music through her. And then as part of figure skating, we had to take, ballroom dancing, ballet dancing, modern dancing or whatever. So that sort of inspired me to move and then do some amazing, both high school teachers and professors, especially one, Josephine Youngich. So not that she's out there, but I don't know if she is or not anymore, but really turned me on to art history and, also became, really, really fascinated with the visual arts. And so, my partner and I were supporters of the San Francisco Ballet, the Symphony, the Modern Art Museum, where I sat on the accessions committee in San Francisco for a few years before coming here. So it's kind of, I think it's in my DNA, and I'm really glad that my mom actually suggested that I study design because originally I wanted to go to architecture school, and in Canada where I grew up, you had to have basically a bachelor's degree in order to apply for architecture. So she suggested that I go for my bachelor's in interior design, and we shared studios with the USC architecture program. And when I heard that it took 5 years for them to do projects, I was like, there's no way I'm doing that. I need to do a bit more immediate, satisfaction. So yeah, I sort of found my calling and found my passion, and I'm very lucky to be sitting here, however many years later, doing what I love and working with some absolutely amazing people that inspire me every single day. So
we're also joined by Alison English. She's former Deputy CEO at Leesman, which she left in July 2024 to co-lead a spin-off organisation, ATO Strategy, which helps clients link business objectives to experience outcomes and turns data into insights. She's passionate about businesses being forces for good. She's led initiatives for Leeseman to become B Corp certified and also was part of the Careers After Babies accreditation program and also on their board. She's also on the Crew UK board, which we'll talk about shortly, and also the advisory board for London Workspace Design Show. So, Alison, many thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks. I'm delighted to be here. Right now, I'm working for a company called Ato Strategy. We started this business in August earlier this year as a spinoff of Leeseman. So I was at Leeseman for a little over 6 years, where we measured and benchmarked employee workplace experience. And one of the things clients kept asking us to do was take their data further and help them do something with it. So what's the so what once they had all of that information? And that wasn't ever something we really did at Leeseman. But as the pandemic changed the nature of work, we started to get a little bit more involved in trying to help clients with that. And that's essentially what the spinoff now is doing. So 6 of us from Leeseman have taken on the challenge to help clients figure out what to do with this data, what it really means. Not just with Leeseman data. We're looking at all types of different data that impacts experience. So it could be from sensors, could be from focus groups, all of these different pieces of a puzzle that come together and make a picture. We're helping clients with their data strategy, but also kind of see what that picture tells them about how they can improve and maximize the experience for employees in their workplaces.
So, what does Ito mean?
Ito actually means that's it. In an Indonesian dialect, it's a slang term. So you just kind of would say, "Oh yeah, Ito," like that's it. So that's what we're helping clients find. We're helping them find the that's it moment, and identifying the moments that matter in an employee's day, what matters to the business, and kind of tying that all together with business objectives.
And you're speaking at the Workspace Design Show in London this year?
I am. Yeah, I'm really excited. I was there earlier for the one this year. I'm delighted to be back next year. I'll be moderating a panel, but I'm also going to be there as a part of Crew. I'm on the board of Crew UK, which for anyone who isn't familiar is the Corporate Real Estate Women's Network. So the UK chapter just became officially a chapter. There are over 14,000 members, primarily in the US, but again, now the organization is spreading globally. And the mission is to advance the status of women in corporate real estate. So we've got an amazing group here. We're so excited to be partnering with the Workspace Design Show for the show in February. So yeah, really looking forward to that.
And you, Collin, what are you speaking about at the Workspace Design Show?
And we have an amazing panel set up. And thank you to Aisha and Charlie, who I think really created something. But this is like the 3rd year now, if I remember correctly, and it's getting better and better every year, the 4th year. I remember when she reached out to me, I was like, oh, wow, this is an amazing idea, because it sort of felt like there was a hole in the market that didn't sort of cover the workplace sector, and a major part of kind of interior design and interior architecture, especially in London, is our world. It's probably one of the most dominant. And so they sort of filled the void, which is great. So hat off to them. And the fact that they actually, invite both, it's cool because it's one of the few places actually where clients and designers come together. We're encouraged to have clients on their panels. And, again, we'll have amazing, I don't want to give away the goods here, but, I'm going to have an amazing panel. And it's really a conversation about the state of design, which is designing for the senses in an area of diversity and inclusion. So, we know now that that there's going to be a lot of things that are driving design, which has changed pretty significantly in the past like 5 to 8 years, something like that. One of them obviously being biophilia and and wellness.
So for you, obviously, designing with the senses is one of the key. It should be on everybody's, every designer's kind of, priority list. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's like, design in some ways has become more complicated, but in some ways it's not at all. It's like designing for the senses is like we're designing for humans, right? And we're sensory beings, and we need to think about the full equation. I think for a long time, especially workplace design was driven by the lowest common denominator. How can we do this fastest, cheapest, and one size fits all, so it's easy for facilities to maintain, right? And then I think we've all sort of realized that if that's what you're driving towards, that's not a place that produces happy people, right? And so often we're seeing in organizations, especially the ones that kind of get it, they're moving the real estate team away from the finance team, waiting for the CFO, usually to the CTO, the chief talent officer, to the CHR, because it really is a people amenity. It's something that's needed. In your workplace, communicate something to your people about whether they're cared for. What the values of the organization are. Everything communicates, and workplace is one of the big things. And in experience, or in an era of experience, I think it's probably a very overused word, but we hear it a lot. Design is really driven by experience. It's experience design now, and the senses are what give us that experience. Sight, sound, taste, etc. So yeah, so it is really, really critical that we're thinking about those things. But I think the other drivers now, so it's not just about sort of the senses, it's also about ESG. Are we really doing the right thing? It is wellness, of course, where biophilia really fits in a big way. It is about sustainability. That's another driver. For sure, biophilia, neurodiversity, which also kind of plays back to some of the things around ESG, et cetera, and then just diversity in general, right? And I think, in some ways, it's made our world more complicated, but in some ways, it's more complicated for all the right reasons, right? That we're actually designing for the people and the end users that are experiencing and using our spaces every day, which is kind of why we're here and the thing that we say that we're doing. I think it's also fascinating, sort of as an aside, that we've moved from an era of sort of like very minimalist sort of design, like just purely design speaking, to something that's very maximalist. So many of our clients come to us now and they're like, we want to work in a Soho house, or, it's like, which is fascinating because in some ways, not the easiest for us to do our job from a sustainability standpoint, because we're adding a lot of stuff that maybe wouldn't have added before, or become sort of very FF&E heavy. But all the more reason for us to be incredibly responsible in the selections and the things that we're putting forward. And I think as an industry, we're getting better and better, but we have a long way to go. And so we can talk about that, though.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. I think people are wanting to create spaces that are going to entice people back to the office. I mean, the conversations we were having like 2 or 3 years ago after lockdown, it was like, well, how are we going to get people back to the office? It was like, and it seems almost old hat now to some designers and to some conversations, but it's still a struggle for some that may be on catch up and wasn't the priority a few years ago and is now. And they've got all this real estate and it's like, how do we get them back?
Yeah.
But then how do we also design, like you just said, how do we design to ensure as well that the products and all the materials and things that we do are not going to have an impact on the planet as well. So
yeah, exactly.
There's the two sides to it, really. So obviously biophilic design for me covers both of those things. It kind of covers the well-being and it covers sustainability, because by its nature it's sustainable. But for you, why is biophilic design important now? Why should designers be looking at it and to consider a biophilic designed solution? Obviously, from a sensory point of view as well as the environmental.
I think obviously there's a lot of amazing research out there, right, around how greening your environment is incredibly important. I think a big lesson learned for me, like moving from San Francisco to London, Bill was like, why didn't you go to New York instead of London? And it's sort of like go to New York and I'm stressed out,
yes.
like I'm there and I'm ready to leave, right? And I think it's because, if you happen to live across from, Central Park, you probably experience, a lot of biophilia and greenery every day, but on a normal day in New York, you don't get that, and I think, coming to London, especially for a little Canadian kid where, a population half the size of the UK lives in, a country, who knows how much larger it is, but basically, the second largest landmass in the world, my world was naturally very natural, right? And, so moving here to London, I felt very comfortable because I was amazed, especially during the lockdowns, like, we didn't have a choice. So it was like finding all little pocket parks in our neighborhood and how we could take our dog off leash, to all these amazing green spaces. And they didn't have to look very hard or very far. They were everywhere, right? Yeah. And there's like a really beautiful rose garden a few blocks away from our house or whatever, just like a who knew, and so I think we all know that being in nature helps us, right? And nature inside helps us even more, right? It helps clean the air, right? There's a NASA study that said something like houseplants can remove up to 80% of air toxins in 24 hours. that's a machine, right? And then, depending on the plants, they can also spit out oxygen, which is giving us, or making the oxygen in the air cleaner, which in a polluted city like London or many others, is incredibly important, right? I think they also, they're known to reduce stress, lower blood pressure, that you do have an improved state of mind. And why that's important really is that people have higher job satisfaction, which leads to greater productivity. If your health complaints or out of office for for being sick, etc. So, an increase in productivity is what every CEO wants, right? They want people to be happy and contributing, in a wonderful way where their brain is ticking in all, on all cylinders. So, to me, it's kind of a no-brainer. It's funny though, because there was a period when biophilia was kind of poo-pooed, like, oh, why would you want plants? They just, muck up the design of your space, right? But I also think it's a little bit like, as designers, in the new era we're in, we kind of need to get over ourselves and realize that the right things to do, we need to take the things that we should be doing, or not should be, that we absolutely have to be doing, and figure out a way to design to the fullest with those things that are now in our toolkit, which have shifted, whether it be embracing imperfection in materials, whether it be reusing materials, like whatever it is, again, we're in this new world, and it's been amazing to see some of the efforts that have been made here. We organize a principals roundtable for those in sort of the workplace commercial interior design world. And the last time we got together was about circularity. And it was just fascinating to learn the challenges and the opportunities. And I think everybody knows that we need to do it. It's a matter of getting there. And we will.
Yeah, exactly. They're trying to persuade people, isn't it, that there is the way of doing it, and the easier we can make it on all sides, and the supply chain particularly too, isn't it? It's just when you find the materials and the furniture, like Herman Miller, and that they take the furniture back and then repurpose the bits of it. And there's there's more and more companies that are doing that, like Grafenstone, for instance. They've got the paints that clean the air, and there's all these different options, isn't there now? But it's trying to find that and put that into your toolkit, as you just said there, which I quite like the idea of. And for you, Alison, what does the future workplace look like? I know that's a massive question, but I mean, maybe what issues we should be addressing.
I think the most important thing that isn't being addressed is understanding what really employees need to do their roles. Like, what do they need to thrive in that type of environment? The game has changed a bit with en masse hybrid working. There are more people who are working remotely with people who are in an office. For organizations who are, multinationals who've worked around the globe for years, maybe this isn't something different, working with different people in different spaces. But it really changes if you're expecting to go in and be around your colleagues and then your colleagues aren't there, or if you need to take a phone call and there's nowhere to do that in the space. So a lot of employees are working in the same spaces that they may have worked in prior to COVID, but the space hasn't changed, but the nature of work has changed. So I think it's about really deeply understanding what employees need in their roles. What are the moments that matter in their day? So you can really maximize those. And how do you drive that experience and link that again to business objectives and business outcomes?
And do you also look at trends and patterns?
Yeah, I mean, of course, at Leastman, we sat on the largest global database of workplace experience. So we would mine that for insights. And one of the things we saw very early on in the data as a trend that continued is that noise is a massive productivity killer. And that's not to say that all open plan offices are bad. There are quite a few that actually were certified as Leastman Plus, which is this kind of elite group of high-performing workplaces. So open plan can be done right. But if you look at Leastman's latest research, it's about getting variety right and the different types of spaces that employees need. So that is a massive part of that experience. And that's what the data is saying, that noise is a problem. There are many different ways to kind of tackle that challenge. But I think being aware of that and then planning for it in the design is incredibly important.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I chatted quite a bit to Paige Hodsman, and when I first spoke to her, and she was telling me about psychoacoustics and the effect that sound has on our brain, everything from like the cortisol levels, the stress levels. But I was surprised on actually it's a physical effect that sound. So obviously if you've got noisy environments or, noisy workplace or noisy healthcare or schools, you can't concentrate properly, can you? It's actually a physical effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Julian Treasure also talks a
Yes.
lot about the impact and how your body physically responds to that, raising cortisol levels, et cetera. So
Yeah.
it's a challenge. And then if you're trying to work on top of that, you're just adding friction to an employee's day. Not to say everyone wants to sit in silence, but again, having variety in different places where people can do different things is really important.
Yeah, actually, I interviewed Julian Treasure a while back, and listeners, I do encourage you to scroll back through the podcast and see if you can find the podcast with Julian Treasure. He's a brilliant. Obviously, his TED Talk is amazing, and his audio book is brilliant. So there's two recommendations there for for listeners. So I suppose really moving on now, Alison, I did want to ask employee experience. Obviously, is really important. Do you have an example maybe where that's been done really well?
Yeah, I think if I think back specifically to Leasman days, and we're going to be working with them, ATO as well, but Standard Chartered Bank has done an incredible job of prioritizing employee experience, understanding what that means to them and how it's different. You know, they're based around the globe. They've got 80,000 employees. They've got an office portfolio and a retail portfolio. So it's quite a diverse employee group, and they have, using Leasman data alongside other data, really created what I would call kind of a machine that understands what that means. They ingest it, they understand what that means, they act on it, and then they measure again. And again, they've been doing that for a number of years with Leasman, achieving a number of Leasman Plus buildings. But they've done really an amazing job of curating spaces and helping employees use those spaces. So they're activating them as well, but really maximizing that employee experience. The Government Property Association, GPA, here in the UK is another example. Public sector, they don't have massive budgets. Obviously, they have to be very cost conscious as part of the government. And they have 2 Leasman Plus sites in the UK. They do an amazing job, again, digging into the data, understanding what experience means to them, and then maximizing that for their organization. So it's not just about big companies, big banks, et cetera, with big budgets. It's about, again, deeply understanding what your employees need.
And biophilic design. Obviously, I have to talk about biophilic design because it's the Biophilic Design podcast. But for you, why is biophilic design really important right now?
It's important because I think at the end of the day, sometimes we forget it, but we're all humans, and we didn't. The structure that we live and work in now is relatively recent. I mean, we are designed to be in and with nature. We're not designed to be sitting at a desk staring at a screen for 8 to 12 hours a day, even though for many of us that's what we do. That's not natural. So I think, again, talking about the cortisol levels and some of the physical changes, being around the part of nature that we can bring indoors, it makes a big difference. And again, I think it gets us closer in tune with nature. The original definition of biophilic design is about love of life. So I think thinking about that really broadly, a lot of people think they've ticked a box with biophilic design by throwing a few plants in a space, and they're going, okay, well, now this is fine. But I think if you think about the definition more broadly, then you approach that very differently, and you think more tangibly about, again, not just a few plants, but when we think about sound, think about what you see, think about what you smell, all of that kind of impacts us in ways that we're aware of, because obviously there are people researching that, but I think it impacts us in ways that they're hard to quantify, but we know it makes a difference.
Do you have an example of where biophilic design or nature-inspired design, obviously biophilia, has been employed in the workplace, for the benefit for employees?
There's a new hub in London. GSK's headquarters has moved into the center of London. And one of the things that they set out to do with this new site is build the world's healthiest building.
Okay.
That is quite an ambition. And they may just have cracked it. They've done some incredible stuff. They've got, there's a restaurant that's on the ground floor that's for employees, but it's also open to the public. They're trying to grow as much food as they can on site, on premise, which in central London, not a whole lot of farms or fields around to be able to do that. So they've installed vertical farming. And it's throughout, I think, the building, but it's also there on the lower ground floor. You can see just rows and rows and rows of different plants, and and herbs and things that you can eat growing that they're going to prepare in the restaurant and then serve to customers, which is pretty incredible. They've taken that into consideration elsewhere. There's several outdoor terraces to try and give people the chance to be outdoors. The color palette is quite kind of earthy. So and obviously there are lots of plants and things around, but I think they've really done an incredible job. They've done lots of research. They really kind of measure and are trying to maximize employee experience, employee performance in their spaces. So I think the new GSK headquarters is an incredible example of that.
And then for you, Collin, do you have an example where you've advised or maybe worked on a biophilic design solution, maybe architecturally or through the design, but maybe how you specified it?
There's some really good examples. Many years ago, we designed actually with Irma Foster, the Fosters, a headquarters for an energy company, ironically, in Calgary, Alberta. And basically, there were sky gardens that were scattered up to, it was a 55-story building, and there were sky gardens about every 7 to 10 floors.
Oh, wow. And
with the idea that, Calgary is very cold in the winter, right? It's hard for people to be outside. It's actually quite, depressing at times because it's cold and white and, beautiful skies at times, these big puffy blue or white clouds. But, you need a little bit of nature. And even though you can see the Rockies off in the distance from the building, there's nothing like being in it, right? And so these sky gardens were this place of sort of, a respite, and this is like 15 years ago. And at the time, anyway, I guess as an aside, that doesn't really matter. But so there were sky gardens, or just in a recent example where we really encouraged a client. I think, we need to lead our clients, right? And educate our clients, we need to go back to the benefits of why this is good, right? And I think it's also about, we've become so disconnected sort of from our planet and how things really are made and grown and whatever. So, a plant may sound like a simple reminder that, that this is something important and something that we need to live in harmony with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I suppose that's also one way to try and help educate people, isn't it? Is to try and bring these plants in and give you said the CHR, for instance, the people who are going to be making that decision, or the CFO, if they're still, got their hands on the, on the control button, as it were. But to get them to be out in nature, or to get them to experience the difference between two different workplaces, I think the experience is probably the strongest way of persuading people, isn't it? And we know obviously that when we're surrounded by nature, we're more empathetic to each other and to ourselves anyway. So I suppose is that one of the key things, do you think, to expose people to?
Absolutely. And again, a recent example, the client had really bad experiences with the plant service, and the plants died and blah, blah, blah. So I think, again, it's like us leading our clients, and we had to remind them of why we needed places for people that are neurodiverse, why they needed this quiet carriage, right? Why they needed to incorporate plants into the workplace. So from the onset, we showed plants, in the space. We actually built in planters. There were parental locations, because sometimes people don't like the sort of loose plants, scattered about the space. But we ended up showing both. And at the end of the day, they're going to do it because I think they realized the benefits. And again, they want healthy people, right? And this is their sort of thing that communicates, how they matter to the organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just before I ask you the final question, though, in terms of sensory design, obviously biophilic design, it's like you say, it's more than just plants. It's like natural air, it's better acoustics, it's those prospect and refuge being in, and particularly if you are, sensorially, easily stimulated, or you're just more acute, your senses are more acute than others. But I mean, we're all like that at some stage anyway, even if we're stressed, and everything just starts driving us nuts, even if we don't know what it is, So, I mean, biophilic design does all that, doesn't it? It kind of, it's sort of, so the thing you're going to be speaking about a workspace design show, are you going to be exploring kind of solutions and sort of what kind of things would you suggest people to also look at in terms of biophilic design?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll be asking the questions. I'm the panel lead, so if we can drive to solutions, I think that would be fantastic. And I think we have 3 amazing experts. will know more than enough and all those things. So yeah, absolutely. And actually, if I could just do a call out to one of the things that sort of irked me, to be really candid, moving here and sort of seeing is like, for some reason, some clients think it's okay, and designers even think it's okay to do plastic plants, right? And it's not. They come from oil, most of them, right? And
Yeah.
they're not really recyclable because by the time you take, the polypropylene away from the nylon and do all this stuff or whatever, no one's going to take the time to do that. And so when we're talking about biophilic design, we're not talking about adding fake green plants in an interior. It's awful, especially in a climate like London, or in the UK, where it's really easy to grow plants, right? And they flourish. So,
Yeah.
and there's amazing, amazing services out there that will provide the plants and take care of them. So yeah, why, in some ways it's like we think we're doing the right thing for the environment, but the reality is we're actually kind of doing the opposite by putting oil in spaces, and I'm sure it has outsourcing, I'm sure it has all kinds of things. So, that they're not good for us.
Sort of moving forward, how can we encourage more businesses to, really understand the importance of biophilic design and start designing more with nature in mind? I mean, is it legislation? Is it education? I mean, it's probably a whole bunch of stuff, but what are the sort of salient points that you kind of like raise at this issue, to try and get more nature inspired design, more biophilic design in the workplace?
I think it's remembering where we've come from as humans and what, like, the type of environments that we used to be in, and trying to make the built environment more like that. So in the materials that we choose, in the things that you can touch, the things that you can see, trying to kind of make that in tune with nature, I think is it's incredibly important to achieve that. Again, there's as you said, there's lots of data out there. It's hard I think it's hard sometimes to explain the difference, but there's a difference in feeling, right? When you're in a space that's designed in that particular way, and there's lots of biophilia around, like you feel differently. So I think keeping that in mind, and I think the other thing organizations need to be working on is trying to trying to put a value on employee experience, and trying to then link that to what the business is actually trying to achieve. It's really easy to tell people, okay, go into your office, work there 3 days a week, and then go home. But why? Like, thinking about the why and what you're actually trying to get out of that. So if you're trying to do, I don't know, to increase your sales or to do more deals or to bring to onboard people faster, then I think you need to be thinking about the design of the space and how employees are interacting with that space very differently. So trying to link the business outcomes to the experience, I think, is a missing piece. And that's one of the reasons we started this business, is we're trying to help organizations do that. But whether we're doing it or not, I think that's absolutely critical.
Is there anything else you'd like to add before I ask you the final question?
I guess, maybe, I think we're really making an effort here to not encourage, but even to sort of mandate sounds like a strong word because we don't mandate things, but like really encourage biophilia, but then also on the sustainability front, to kind of use our specification, clout in the market to create change. And it'll be interesting to see if we can affect areas like biophilia or others as well. But we've recently introduced the Gensler product selection criteria, which is called GPS. And essentially, we kind of looked at the 12 highest sort of carbon producing products that are out there and sort of put them all through sort of a test to make sure that they were meeting a criteria. And if they were meeting the criteria, they were stayed in the library. If they weren't, they're out, right? And so, which sounds harsh, but the reality is, the only way we're going to make change, if the government isn't already stepping in to regulate things, is for organizations such as Gensler and many others that are out there, who I know are doing amazing things. So I think as an industry, I think we're all trying. But I think, again, I think I'm very optimistic that hopefully the next generation is really going to mandate and demand this, in all of their work, and we do see it, and so strongly encourage them to kind of keep making this stuff happen.
Yeah, that's really nice. So this GPS, the Gensler, is that open to the public? Can people see that?
It's actually on our website. So if you go to the Gensler website and search for GPS, you'll find all the information there. We're very open source with both our research and things like this in an industry in an effort to kind of have the industry join us if they want to, or change it or do better than we're doing, yeah, because again, the only way we're going to get there is as a community to make it happen. So
yeah. Fantastic. Well, that's brilliant. Well, I'll put a link on the spiel that goes with the podcast. So the final question that I ask everybody who comes on the podcast: if you could paint the world with a magic brush of biophilia, what would it look like?
I think we'd hear more. We'd hear more nature sounds, natural sounds. I was on a call, I don't know, I called a bank or something recently, and I was on hold and they were playing music. And then they said, if you'd rather hear birds chirping instead of this music, press 2. And I did. And, I waited 10 minutes, but I didn't feel like I was waiting 10 minutes. It wasn't the same loop of classical music that I didn't choose. The music wasn't offensive, but it wasn't particularly inspiring either. But somehow listening to birds chirp in the background didn't make me feel as anxious about, okay, when are they going to get to me? When is it my turn? I'd be really curious to know if they're measuring the call outcomes and the experience after having listened to the music versus the bird song. But either way, there's another study about a decade ago or so. There's a town, a part of Los Angeles, where they started playing bird song about 5 hours a day, and they found that major crime dropped. Major crime and minor crime both dropped when they were doing this experiment, because again, they were thinking that their hypothesis was that putting people more in tune with nature kind of calms them a little bit, and maybe they're less reactive to things that might have initially kind of pushed them. So I think we underestimate the impact of those sounds. So I'd love to hear more of that, especially if you're in the city and they're not, none of that's naturally readily available. So I'd love to hear more. I'd love to see more. You want to touch more. I think taking our senses really into account when we're thinking about places and people's experience of those places.
great question. I love this question. So I think, to me, again, sort of growing up in Canada, which was like, super, even the province I grew up in, their tagline for the longest time for tourism was, super beautiful British Columbia, right? Or super naturals, right? Super natural, beautiful British Columbia, right? And it's like, when I was really little, my dad worked for an oil company. Sorry, he did. And we lived all kinds of places around northern Canada, and so we got to interface a lot with the First Nations. And I remember like going to have my mucklucks, which are basically like the leather shoes made, and going into the tribes, villages, and things like that, and then and just, I don't know, the energy, the things that you learn through interaction with them, going to school with them. They were living in a completely different planet than the planet we lived on in a lot of ways, right? They were still respecting the earth, and they understood the human position in the realm of the natural context, right? And they respected plants, they respected animals, they were sustenance, and the animals had different energies that they brought to them and to the world, and different lessons, right? And I would kind of hope that at some point we can get back to that, like we're so disconnected sort of in this sort of very sterile world that we live in, going to Sainsbury's and buying packaged, a package of tomatoes or whatever. But, there's this whole system before that grew these tomatoes, right? And I think even in London, just in our borough in Southwark, we just recently introduced composting. And like coming from San Francisco, companies have been in place for like 15 years. You actually felt good when you threw something away, because you knew that even, if everybody didn't eat their plate, you were putting in the compost, which, went back to like the community compost. That all goes up to this place in just north of San Francisco. They couldn't get enough compost to keep all the, the vineyards, the wineries, and all the fruits and vegetables and things. So it becomes its own little ecosystem. And I'm kind of hoping all that exists, all the components are here in the UK. I hope we get back to that, and biophilia is obviously kind of a major part of that.
Thank you for listening to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast.